in the world of wildlife rescue survival is never guaranteed, but sometimes fate steps in to weave an extraordinary tale, one that defies instinct, logic, and even nature itself. At the Oklahoma Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, a fragile bobcat named Bone Digger arrived with little hope, weak, malnourished, and suffering from a rare bone disease. He had already lost the ability to live in the wild. He refused food, ignored the caretaker's efforts, and withdrew into himself as if giving up. Then one day, everything changed. A dachshund named Milo, a dog with a heart bigger than his tiny body, entered Bone Digger's world. The moment their eyes met, something remarkable happened. It wasn't just curiosity, it wasn't just coincidence. It was connection. What followed was an unbreakable friendship that stunned even the most seasoned wildlife experts, because when Milo was taken away, Bone Digger's heart and his will to live began to fade. What happened next would prove that love isn't bound by species, and that sometimes the most unexpected friendships have the power to heal, to inspire, and to change everything. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Oklahoma Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, its golden rays warming the weathered wooden buildings that had stood sentinel over countless rescued animals for more than 3 decades. Sarah Mitchell, the center's lead veterinarian, walked the familiar path between the enclosures, her worn boots crunching on the gravel. At 58, she had dedicated her life to healing injured and orphaned wildlife, but the case that awaited her today was unlike any she had encountered in her 25 years at the center. Inside a quiet, climate-controlled room, a 3-month-old bobcat lay curled in the corner of his enclosure. His tawny fur was dull, lacking the usual luster of a healthy wild cat, and his limbs were noticeably thinner than they should have been. This was Bone Digger, named by the center's junior veterinarian for his rare condition, a metabolic bone disease that left his skeleton fragile and his movements cautious. Morning, little one, Sarah whispered, approaching the enclosure with a bowl of specially prepared formula. Bone Digger's ears twitched at the sound of her voice, but he made no move to approach. His green eyes, flecked with gold, watched her wearily from his corner. The bobcat had arrived at the center 2 weeks earlier, found abandoned near a construction site on the outskirts of Tulsa. The workers who discovered him noticed his unusual gait and called the wildlife authorities immediately. Initial examinations revealed the extent of his condition, a genetic disorder that affected his body's ability to properly process calcium and other minerals essential for bone development. Sarah sighed as she set down the bowl, knowing that Bone Digger would likely wait until she left before attempting to eat it. Wasn't just his physical condition that worried her. The young bobcat seemed to carry a deep loneliness that no amount of medical care could address, unlike other cubs his age who typically showed curiosity and playfulness despite their injuries. Bone Digger remained withdrawn, as if he had already accepted a life of solitude. Dr. Mitchell, a voice called from the doorway. It was Jake Thompson, one of the center's most dedicated volunteers. At 23, he was studying veterinary medicine at Oklahoma State University and spent every free moment at the rehabilitation center. There's someone here to see you, says it's urgent. Sarah nodded, taking one last look at Bone Digger before following Jake outside. The morning air was crisp with the promise of autumn, and the sound of various animals going about their morning routines filled the air. The chatter of recovering raccoons, the soft hooting of convalescing owls, and the occasional bark from the domestic area where staff pets were housed during the day. At the center's main office, she found Martha Cooper, a local ELE schoolteacher she had known for years. Martha's eyes were red-rimmed, and she clutched a small carrier in her arms. Sarah, I didn't know where else to go, she began, her voice trembling. It's about Milo. Sarah knew Milo well. Martha's 8-year-old dachshund was a frequent visitor to the center, having participated in their educational programs where Martha would bring her students to learn about wildlife conservation. The little dog had always shown an unusual gentleness around the rescued animals, earning him the nickname the Wildlife Whisperer among the staff. "What happened?" Sarah asked, gesturing for Martha to bring the carrier inside. "I'm being transferred to Arizona," Martha explained, setting the carrier down carefully. "My mother's sick and they had an opening at a school in Phoenix. I leave next week." She paused, wiping her eyes. "The apartment I found doesn't allow pets, and I can't find anyone to take him." "I know it's not what you usually do here." But Sarah understood immediately. The center occasionally housed domestic animals in special circumstances, particularly those that had shown an ability to help in the rehabilitation of wildlife. Milo had demonstrated that capability time and time again. "Of course, we'll take him," Sarah said without hesitation. "He's always been more at home here anyway." She opened the carrier door, and Milo trotted out, his long body and short legs moving with surprising grace. Despite being in his senior years, his brown eyes were bright and alert, his red brown coat still glossy. Martha knelt down, wrapping her arms around her faithful companion. "One last time, be good, sweet boy," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Help other animals like you've always done." As Sarah watched the emotional goodbye, she couldn't have known that this moment would mark the beginning of one of the most remarkable relationships she had ever witnessed in her long career, a friendship that would challenge everything she thought she knew about the boundaries between wild and domestic animals. The first few days after Martha's departure were difficult for Milo. The Dachshund spent hours sitting by the office window, his ears drooping slightly, watching the gravel driveway where his owner's car had disappeared. Sarah made sure he was comfortable, setting up a bed in her office and taking him on regular walks around the scent grounds. It was during one of these walks, about a week after his arrival, that Milo first encountered Bone Digger. They were passing by the Bobcat's room when Milo suddenly stopped, his nose twitching with interest. Before Sarah could react, the little dog had trotted through the door that Jake had left ajar while cleaning. "Milo, wait!" Sarah called, hurrying after him. She froze in the doorway, her heart in her throat as she saw Milo approaching Bone Digger's enclosure. The Bobcat, usually so withdrawn, had raised his head and was watching the Dachshund with intense curiosity. To Sarah's amazement, there was no fear in either animal's demeanor. Milo sat down near the enclosure, his tail wagging gently, while Bone Digger slowly stood and made his way closer to the barrier between them. The Bobcat's movement was careful, hampered by his condition, but there was an eagerness in his steps that Sarah had never seen before. "Well, I'll be damned," Jake whispered, having returned to find this unusual scene. The two animals were now just inches apart, separated only by the enclosure mesh. Bone Digger made a soft chirping sound of vocalization Sarah had never heard from him before, and Milo responded with a gentle whine, his entire body wiggling with friendly enthusiasm. That first meeting marked the beginning of a transformation in Bone Digger. Over the next few days, the young Bobcat began and showing interest in his surroundings. For the first time since his arrival, he would watch the door expectantly each morning, and his ears would perk up at the sound of Milo's distinctive nails clicking on the concrete floor. Sarah began allowing supervised visits, carefully monitoring their interactions. Milo seemed to instinctively understand Bone Digger's physical limitations, never pushing or playing too roughly. Instead, he would lie near the Bobcat, sometimes bringing his favorite toy, a well-worn plush squirrel, and placing it near the enclosure as an offering of friendship. The most remarkable change came at feeding time. Bone Digger, who had previously eaten only the minimum necessary to survive, began showing enthusiasm for his meals. When Milo was present, the Dachshund would sit nearby, offering what seemed like encouragement. And after Bone Digger finished eating, Milo would approach the mesh barrier to everyone's amazement. The bobcat would present his face, allowing Milo to carefully lick around his mouth and whiskers, cleaning away any remnants of food. It's like they're speaking their own language, observed Dr. Emily Sully, the Scent junior veterinarian, as she watched this ritual one afternoon. Milo's basically providing the kind of care a mother bobcat would give to her cub. The staff began documenting this unprecedented relationship, taking notes and photographs for future research. They were witnessing something that challenged conventional wisdom about natural instincts and species barriers. Bone Digger, despite being a wild predator, showed no aggressive tendencies toward the much smaller Doc. If anything, he seemed protective of Milo, often positioning himself between the Dachshund and any unfamiliar sounds or movements. As weeks turned into months, Bone Digger's physical condition began to improve. Regular exercise with Milo, coupled with his increased appetite and apparent happiness, led to stronger bones and better muscle development. While he would never be able to return to the wild due to his genetic condition, he was becoming more active and coordinated. The center staff modified Bone Digger's enclosure to create a special section where Milo could safely enter and interact with directly. These supervised play sessions became the highlight of both animals' days. They would chase each other at their own pace, share quiet moments of rest, and even eat their meals together, though strictly separated by a barrier during feeding time as a safety precaution. As winter approached, bringing with its shorter days and colder temperatures, a new challenge emerged at the rehabilitation center. During a routine board meeting, concerns were raised about the unusual UAL relationship between Bone Digger and Milo. Several board members, while acknowledging the positive impact on both animals, expressed worry about potential risks. "I understand the therapeutic benefits," said Richard Harrison, one of the center's longest serving board members, "but we can't ignore the fact that we're housing a wild predator with a domestic dog. What happens when Bone Digger's instincts fully mature?" The question hung heavy in the air of the conference room. Sarah, who had been presenting the latest progress reports on Bone Digger's recovery, felt her heart sink. She had known this conversation was coming, but that didn't make it any easier. Bone Digger has shown no aggressive behavior, she argued, spreading photographs across the table. Images of the bobcat and cun sleeping peacefully side by side, playing together, grooming each other. If anything, he's demonstrated remarkable gentleness with Milo. Dr. Sully supported Sarah's position, presenting data from their observations. Their relationship has actually helped socialize Bone Digger in ways we never expected. His stress levels are down, his eating habits have normalized, and his bone density has improved significantly. But the board remained divided. After hours of debate, they reached a difficult decision. Bone Digger and Milo would need to be separated, at least temporarily, while the center conducted a more thorough assessment of the risks involved. Breaking the news to the staff was difficult, but implementing the separation was heartbreaking. The morning it was to take place, Sarah arrived early, her stomach in knots. She found Milo and Bone Digger in their usual morning routine. The Dachshund curled up against the bobcat side, both animals peacefully dozing in the warm sunlight that streamed through the window. "I'm so sorry," she whispered as she attached Milo's leash. The dachshund looked up at her with trusting eyes, wagging his tail slightly. Bone Digger stirred, watching them with what Sarah could have sworn was confusion in his golden green eyes. As Sarah led Milo away, Bone Diggers stood up, making soft chirping sounds. Their special greeting for the first time since his arrival at the center. He paced anxiously along the edge of his enclosure, watching as his friend disappeared through the door. The effects of the separation were immediate and devastating. Bone Digger refused to eat his breakfast that morning turning away from the bowl even when Jake tried to tempt him with his favorite treats by evening. The bobcat had retreated to the furthest corner of his enclosure, his back turned to the door where Milo usually entered. Milo wasn't faring much better, moved to a different building on the center's grounds. The usually cheerful Dachshund became listless. He would lie in his bed, barely responding to attention from the staff, his eyes fixed on the door as if expecting his friend to appear at any moment. Days turned into weeks, and the situation only worsened. Bone Digger's health began to decline rapidly. He ate only when hand-fed, and even then just enough to survive. His coat lost its recently gained luster, becoming dull and unkempt. Most concerning was his complete withdrawal from any interaction. He no longer responded to the staff's voices or showed interest in enrichment activities. Dr. Sully conducted regular health checks, growing increasingly worried about the bobcat's deteriorating condition. His bone density is decreasing again, she reported to Sarah one evening, her voice heavy with concern. Without the physical activity and mental stimulation he got from playing with Milo combined with his poor appetite, his condition is regressing. We're losing all the progress we made. Sarah spent countless hours observing both animals, documenting their decline. She couldn't help but draw parallels to cases of depression in humans who had lost their closest companions. The scientific part of her mind knew it was dangerous to anthropomorphize, but her decades of experience working with animals told her that this was about more than just learned behavior or routine disruption. The situation reached a critical point when Bone Digger stopped eating entirely. For 3 days he refused all food, barely moving from his corner. His eyes, once bright with life and joy, had become dull and distant. The staff tried everything: new foods, different feeding schedules, various enrichment activities, but nothing seemed to reach him. On a cold December morning, Sarah arrived at the center to find Jake waiting for her, his face etched with worry. "Dr. Mitchell, you need to see this," he said, leading her to Bone Digger's enclosure. The bobcat was lying on his side, his breathing shallow. He didn't even lift his head when they entered the room. Dr. Sully was already there, reviewing his vital signs with a grim expression. "His body temperature is lower than it should be," she reported. "Blood sugar is dangerously low from not eating. If we don't do something soon." She didn't need to finish the sentence. They all knew what was at stake. Sarah made a decision, then one that would either save Bone Digger's life or vindicate all the board's concerns. She pulled out her phone and dialed Richard Harrison's number. "Richard, this is Sarah. I know it's early, but we have an emergency situation with Bone Digger." She explained the bobcat's condition, then took a deep breath. "I'm going to reunite him with Milo. I'll take full responsibility for whatever happens, but if we don't do something now, we're going to lose him." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Finally, Richard spoke, his voice tired but resigned. "Do what you need to do, Sarah. Just be careful." Within minutes, Jake had gone to fetch Milo. The docs, hearing the familiar route being taken, began to perk up for the first time in weeks. His tail, which had barely wagged since the separation, began to move with increasing enthusiasm as they approached Bone Digger's room. Milo's excitement grew the moment the door opened. He rushed inside, making a beeline for the bobcat's enclosure. The staff watched, hearts in their throats, as Sarah carefully opened the enclosure door. What happened next would be talked about at the center for years to come. Milo, showing no fear or hesitation, trotted straight to Bone Digger. The bobcat, hearing his friend's approach, lifted his head weakly. For a moment, time seemed to stand still as the two animals regarded each other, then with more energy than he had shown in weeks. Bone Digger struggled to his feet. Milo reached him just as he got up, and the dachshund immediately began gently licking his friend's face. The bobcat made a sound somewhere between a purr and a chirp, Leaning into the attention, would you? Look at that, Jake whispered, wiping at his eyes with the back of his hand. Within hours, Bone Digger had eaten his first full meal in days. By evening, he was moving around his enclosure again, following Milo's excited pacing. The change was nothing short of miraculous. The reunion of Bone Digger and Milo marked the beginning of a new chapter at the Oklahoma Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. The board, faced with undeniable evidence of the positive impact of their relationship, voted unanimously to allow their continued interaction with certain safety protocols in place. Sarah and her team developed a comprehensive program around their unique bond. They began documenting everything meticulously, creating what would become one of the most detailed studies of cross-species friendship in a rehabilitation setting. The story of Bone Digger and Milo began attracting attention from the wider scientific community. Researchers from various universities visited the center to observe their interactions, and veterinary journals expressed interest in publishing their case study. But more importantly, their relationship began changing how the center approached animal rehabilitation altogether. What we're seeing here goes beyond simple companionship, Dr. Sully explained to a group of visiting veterinary students. One spring morning, Milo's presence has actually accelerated Bone Digger's physical recovery. The emotional support has translated into measurable physiological improvements. Indeed, Bone Digger's progress was remarkable. While his genetic condition would always require careful management, his bone density had improved significantly. He moved with more confidence, and his playful sessions with Milo helped maintain his muscle strength. The center's physical therapy program now incorporated their natural play behaviors, using their interactions as a form of exercise therapy. SR noticed other changes too. Bone Digger, once so withdrawn, began showing interest in other animals at the center, while Milo remained his primary companion. He would watch with curiosity when other rescued animals were brought in for treatment. His chirping vocalizations, once reserved only for Milo, occasionally extended to the staff members he trusted most. Milo, despite his advancing years, seemed rejuvenated by his role as Bone Digger's companion. His gray muzzle might have betrayed his age, but his spirit remained youthful. He took his self-appointed duties as Bone Digger's caretaker seriously, maintaining their daily routines with unwavering dedication. Their peaceful routine faced a new test when Milo developed arthritis in his back legs, a common condition in aging dachshunds. One morning, he struggled to keep up with his usual rounds, his steps becoming increasingly labored. He needs to rest, Dr. Sully advised. After examining the elderly dog at his age, we need to be careful about overexertion. But Milo had other ideas. Despite his discomfort, he insisted on visiting Bone Digger, whining at the office door until Sarah relented. What they witnessed next added yet another remarkable chapter to their story. Bone Digger, seeming to sense his friend's condition, immediately adjusted his behavior. Instead of their usual active play, the Bobcat settled down on his cushioned platform, making soft, encouraging sounds until Milo carefully climbed up to join him. From that day forward, their interactions became gentler, with Bone Digger showing an almost protective attitude toward his aging friend. It's a complete role reversal, Jake observed, watching as Bone Digger waited patiently for Milo to catch up during their walks in the enclosed exercise yard. Remember how Milo used to help Bone Digger when he was struggling to move? Now Bone Digger's returning the favor. The center's veterinary team developed a joint treatment plan for both animals. Milo received regular physical therapy for his arthritis, while Bone Digger continued his bone health treatments. They scheduled their therapy sessions together whenever possible, finding that both animals responded better to treatment when in each other's presence. As another year passed, the story of Bone Digger and Milo became legend at the Oklahoma Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. Their friendship had not only survived against all odds but grown stronger through every challenge. The once fragile Bobcat had developed into a strong, confident adult, while Milo, though slowed by age, remained the steady, loving presence that had changed both their lives. Martha Cooper, who had settled in Arizona, made occasional visits to check on Milo. During one such visit, she watched through tearful eyes as her former pet snoozed peacefully next to his unlikely best friend. When I had to leave him here, I was heartbroken, she admitted to Sarah, but now I see it was meant to be. He found his true purpose. The center established the Bone Digger and Milo Fund to support research into alternative rehabilitation methods, particularly those involving companion animals in wildlife recovery. Their story inspired other rehabilitation centers to reconsider traditional approaches to animal care, all always with appropriate safety measures in place. One morning, as Sarah watched the pair during their breakfast routine, Bone Digger eating his specially prepared meal while Milo supervised from his cushioned bed nearby, she reflected on how this extraordinary friendship had challenged everything she thought she knew about animal relationships. You know, she said to Jake, who was preparing medications nearby, when I first started in this field, we were taught strict boundaries between wild and domestic animals, but these two, they've shown us that sometimes the heart knows better than all our textbooks. Jake nodded, watching his Bone Digger finished his meal and carefully made his way over to Milo, settling down beside his elderly friend. The Dune's tail wagged slowly, and he gave the Bobcat's face a gentle lick, the same gesture of affection that had started their friendship years ago. They've given us so much more than just a remarkable case study, Jake replied. They've shown us that healing isn't just about treating physical injuries or illnesses. Sometimes it's about finding that one special connection that makes life worth living. As the morning sun streamed through the windows, casting warm light over the unlikely pair, Sarah couldn't help but smile. In a world that often seemed determined to highlight differences and divisions, Bone Digger and Milo had demonstrated that love, friendship, and loyalty know no bounds. Their story had become more than just an unusual tale of animal companionship. It was a testament to the healing power of unconditional love and a reminder that sometimes the most beautiful relationships emerge from the most unexpected circumstances. The center continues to care for both Bone Digger and Milo, maintaining their special bond while helping other animals in need. Their legacy lives on in every new case that comes through the doors, reminding the staff that in the journey of healing, having a true friend by your side can make all the difference. Though their story began with uncertainty and fear, it blossomed into something extraordinary, a friendship that not only saved 2 lives, but also changed countless others. In the quiet moments of each day, as Bone Digger and Milo share their peaceful companionship, they continue to teach everyone around them that the purest forms of love often transcend the boundaries we humans create, showing us that in the end, it's not our differences that define us, but our capacity to care for one another.